How does a man come home from work and find himself locked out of the house he owns and still end the night in control? When my brother's wife laughed and said they had changed the locks, I didn't raise my voice or threaten anyone. I made one quiet call, trusted the systems they ignored, and by morning they were begging me to forgive them. The porch light was different, not broken, not burned out, just different. As I climbed the 3 concrete steps to my front door after another 12-hour shift supervising freight logistics, something in my peripheral vision registered the change. The bulb was LED now, casting a cooler, whiter glow than the warm incandescent I'd installed 2 months ago. I paused, keys already in hand, and noticed the lock itself. The brass deadbolt gleamed like it had been recently installed, free of the small scratches and weather dulling that accumulate over years of use. My key slid in smoothly, too smoothly, but when I turned it, nothing happened. I tried again, applying gentle pressure, checking that I was using the house key and not the car remote or office key. The metal turned freely in the cylinder, but the mechanism didn't engage. No click, no resistance, no familiar give of tumblers falling into place. Standing there under that new LED light, I felt the first flutter of something I couldn't quite name. Not panic, not anger. Just a cold recognition that the ground beneath my feet had shifted without my permission. I pulled out my phone and called Ethan. "Hey, Dean." My younger brother's voice was tight, careful. "What's up?" "I can't get into the house," I said, keeping my tone level. "Did something happen to the lock?" A pause. Then muffled voices in the background, Ethan speaking to someone with his hand partially covering the phone. I caught fragments. "He's here? And what do I—" "Ethan?" More muffled conversation. Then a different voice came on the line. "Brooke." "Hi, Dean." Her tone was bright, almost cheerful. "Yeah, we changed the locks today." The flutter in my chest crystallized into something sharper. "You what?" "We changed the locks. Ethan and I talked about it, and we decided it was time to make this place more secure. You know, with everything that's been going on in the neighborhood." Nothing had been going on in the neighborhood. We lived on a quiet street where the biggest excitement was Mrs. Vero's garden gnome collection and the occasional delivery truck taking a wrong turn. "Brooke, this is my house." She laughed, actually laughed. "Well, it's our house now, isn't it? I mean, we've been living here for 8 months, paying for groceries, utilities, maintenance. Ethan's name should have been on the deed from the beginning, don't you think? Brothers should share." I could hear Ethan in the background, his voice too low to make out words but carrying the tone of someone trying to calm a situation down, or maybe trying to stop it from escalating further. "Can I talk to Ethan, please?" "He's busy right now. Look, Dean, we're not trying to be difficult. We just think it's time for some changes around here. Maybe you could stay somewhere else tonight. Give us all some space to figure this out." Across the street, I saw Hannah Porter's curtains twitch. She was probably wondering why I was standing on my own porch, phone pressed to my ear, instead of going inside like I had every night for the past 3 years. "Brooke, I have to go. We'll talk tomorrow, okay? When everyone's had time to think." The line went silent. I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone's black screen, then looked up at my house. The house I'd bought with money I'd saved for 6 years. The house where I'd installed every light fixture, painted every room, fixed every squeaky hinge and running toilet. The house where my brother and his wife had been staying temporarily while they got back on their feet. Through the living room window, I could see them. Ethan was sitting on the couch. My couch, technically, with his head in his hands. Brooke was standing near the window, arms crossed, watching me. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She just stood there, chin raised, as if daring me to do something about it. I walked to my car. The Honda Civic was parked in the same spot I'd left it that morning, in the driveway of the house I couldn't enter. I got in, closed the door, and sat in the driver's seat looking at my own front door. Hannah Porter emerged from her house across the street, ostensibly to check her mailbox, though mail had been delivered hours ago. She moved slowly, clearly hoping to catch my eye or maybe overhear something that would explain why her neighbor was sitting in his car instead of going inside. I rolled down the window. "Evening, Hannah." She approached my car with the careful friendliness of someone who knows something is wrong, but doesn't want to pry too obviously. "Hi, Dean. Everything okay?" "Lock's giving me trouble," I said. "Might need to call a locksmith." She nodded, glancing toward the house. "I saw some activity earlier. Van in the driveway, couple of guys working on your door. Figured you'd hired someone to upgrade the security. What time was that?" "Oh, maybe 2 o'clock? 3? They were here for about an hour." While I was at work. While I was 40 minutes away, managing shipping schedules and coordinating freight deliveries, someone had been at my house changing my locks. "Did you see who called them?" Hannah's expression grew more careful. "Well, Brooke was there the whole time, supervising, you know. Seemed like she knew what she was doing." I thanked Hannah and rolled the window back up. She lingered for a moment, clearly hoping for more information, then retreated to her house with obvious reluctance. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in over a year. Caleb Rhodes, the attorney who'd handled my house purchase. It was nearly 10 o'clock, but Caleb had always been a night owl. He answered on the second ring. "Dean, this is unexpected. What's going on?" "I need to ask you a legal question. Hypothetically, if someone changes the locks on a house they don't own, what are the homeowner's options?" A pause. "That's oddly specific for a hypothetical question. Are we talking about tenants, squatters, family members?" "Family members who were staying temporarily." "Ah." His voice sharpened with professional interest. "And these family members have no legal claim to the property? No lease agreement, no ownership stake, no court order?" "None of that. Then they've just committed unlawful exclusion of the property owner. Depending on the circumstances, it could be trespassing, conversion, maybe even criminal mischief." "How long have they been staying there?" 8 months. Long enough to potentially claim tenant rights, but not if they were staying as guests without a formal rental agreement. Do you have documentation of the arrangement?" I thought about it. "Text messages, maybe some emails, nothing formal." "That actually works in your favor. No lease means no tenant protections. They're essentially house guests who've overstayed their welcome and now excluded their host. That's legally indefensible." "What would you recommend?" "Officially, file for immediate eviction and restoration of access. Unofficially, how quickly do you want them out, and how much do you care about maintaining family relationships?" I looked at my house again. The lights were on in the kitchen now. Brooke was probably making dinner, with groceries I'd paid for, in a kitchen I'd renovated, using utilities that came out of my bank account. "I want them out," I said. "But I want to do it right. No shortcuts, no drama, just properly. I can have papers drawn up by tomorrow afternoon. Fair warning, though. This is going to get ugly. Family disputes over property always do." "It's already ugly, Caleb. I'm sitting in my car because I can't get into my own house." "Point taken. I'll start the paperwork tonight. In the meantime, document everything. Take pictures of the new locks, save any text messages or voicemails, get a written statement from that neighbor if she's willing. The more evidence you have of the timeline and circumstances, the stronger your position." After we hung up, I sat in the car for another 20 minutes, watching my house. The kitchen light went off. The living room TV flickered with changing channels. Eventually, the upstairs bedroom light came on. The master bedroom that had been mine until this morning. I started the car and drove to the all-night diner on Route 9. The diner was nearly empty at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Just me, a trucker working on a plate of meatloaf, and a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I ordered coffee and a sandwich I didn't want, needing the time and space to think through how we'd gotten here. 8 months ago, Ethan had called me at 2 in the morning. "Dean, I'm sorry to wake you up, but we need help." Brooke had been laid off from her job at the insurance company. Their lease was up, and they didn't have enough for first and last month's rent on a new place. Could they stay with me for a few weeks, just until they got back on their feet? Of course I'd said yes. Ethan was my only family, 6 years younger, the brother I'd looked out for ever since our parents were lost in a car accident when he was 22. He'd always been the one who needed help, with money, with jobs, with decisions. I'd always been the one who provided it. Just until we find something, he'd promised. A month, maybe 2 at the outside. They'd moved in the next weekend. Brooke had immediately started rearranging things. Not major changes, just small adjustments that somehow made the house feel less like mine. She moved my coffee maker to a different counter because the morning light is better over here. She rearranged the living room furniture to create better flow. She replaced my shower curtain with one she said was more modern. Each change was small, reasonable, presented as an improvement. And because I worked long hours and valued harmony over control, I let them slide. But looking back now, I could see the pattern. The gradual shift from guest behavior to owner behavior. The way Dean's house became our house, in Brooke's vocabulary. The way my preferences stopped being consulted and started being overruled. 3 months in, I'd come home to find my home office had been converted into Brooke's craft room. "I hope you don't mind," she'd said, not sounding particularly concerned about whether I minded or not. "I needed space for my projects, and you never use this room anyway." That wasn't true. I used it every weekend to pay bills, manage my finances, handle household paperwork. But it was easier to set up a temporary workspace in my bedroom than to argue about it. 4 months in, Ethan had started talking about our utility bills and our grocery expenses, as if we were roommates who'd chosen to live together rather than family members in a temporary arrangement. "Maybe we should set up a joint account for household expenses," Brooke had suggested. "Make it easier to manage everything." I'd declined, politely but firmly. That was the first time I'd seen the flash of anger in her eyes, quickly covered, but unmistakably there. 5 months in, she'd asked where I kept the house deed and insurance papers. "Just in case something happens," she'd explained. "If there's an emergency and you're not here, someone should know where the important documents are." I'd told her they were in a safety deposit box at the bank, which was true. What I hadn't mentioned was that I'd moved them there the week before, after coming home to find her going through my desk drawers, looking for a pen. 6 months in, Ethan had stopped looking for work entirely. When I'd asked about it, he'd gotten defensive. "Brooke thinks I should take some time to figure out what I really want to do with my life. She's supporting us both with her freelance work." Brooke's freelance work seemed to consist mainly of online surveys and craft projects she sold on Etsy. As far as I could tell, it brought in maybe $200 a month. I was still paying for groceries, utilities, insurance, property taxes, and maintenance. 7 months in, they'd started talking about long-term plans that included staying in the house indefinitely. "We could convert the basement into a separate apartment," Brooke had suggested. "That way, we'd all have our own space, but we could still share expenses and help each other out." Or, Ethan had added, "we could look into adding my name to the deed, for estate planning purposes. So if something happens to you, the house doesn't get tied up in probate." That conversation had happened 3 weeks ago. I'd deflected it by saying I needed to think about it and talk to my attorney. Since then, the atmosphere in the house had grown increasingly tense. Brooke had become more assertive about household decisions. Ethan had become more withdrawn, caught between his wife's ambitions and his brother's growing reluctance. And now, apparently, they'd decided to force the issue. The waitress refilled my coffee cup and asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head and pulled out my phone to start documenting, as Caleb had advised. I took a screenshot of the call log showing Brooke's number and the time of our conversation. I typed out a detailed account of what she'd said, including her exact words about the house being ours now and her suggestion that I stay somewhere else. Then I scrolled through my text messages, looking for evidence of the original arrangement. There it was, Ethan's text from 8 months ago. Just need a place to crash for a few weeks while we get back on our feet. We'll pay our share of utilities and groceries. And my response, of course, stay as long as you need to get stable. I'd meant it as generosity. They'd apparently interpreted it as an invitation to permanent residency. I finished my sandwich and coffee, paid the check, and drove to a hotel near the interstate. The desk clerk was professional but curious about why someone was checking in at midnight without luggage. I told him my house was being fumigated, which seemed to satisfy his curiosity. The room was clean, anonymous, and quiet. I sat on the bed and called Caleb back. "Quick question," I said when he answered. "If someone has been staying in your house for 8 months without paying rent, do they have any legal claim to the property?" "Not unless they can prove they've been paying the mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance costs. Even then, they'd need to show they were doing so under the belief that they had ownership rights, and that you somehow encouraged that belief. It's called adverse possession, but it requires very specific circumstances and usually much longer time frames." "What if they've been paying for groceries and utilities?" "That might establish them as tenants, which would give them certain rights against eviction. But it wouldn't give them ownership rights, and it definitely wouldn't give them the right to exclude you from your own property. So, changing the locks is illegal, regardless of their tenant status. Even if they were legal tenants, they can't exclude the landlord without a court order." I felt something loosen in my chest. "So I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy. You're being manipulated by people who are hoping you don't know your rights. The good news is you do know your rights. The better news is we can enforce them." After we hung up, I lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about my brother. Ethan had always been easily influenced, but he'd never been cruel or dishonest. This felt like Brooke's plan, with Ethan as a reluctant participant. That gave me hope that this could be resolved without destroying our relationship entirely. But it also meant I needed to be strategic about how I handled it. If I came in too aggressively, Ethan would circle the wagons with his wife. If I was too passive, Brooke would interpret it as weakness and push harder. I needed to find the middle path, firm enough to establish boundaries, but careful enough to leave Ethan a way back to being my brother instead of my adversary. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. and tried to sleep. The county property records office opened at 8, and I was waiting in the parking lot at 7:45. I'd stopped at a convenience store for coffee and a breakfast sandwich, but mostly I wanted to be the first person through the door. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain, was helpful and efficient. I explained that I needed to verify the ownership status of my property and check if any claims or liens had been filed against it. "Property address?" I gave her my address, and she pulled up the records on her computer. "Okay, here we go. Property purchased 3 years ago by Dean Michael Calix. Mortgage through First National Bank, current and in good standing. No liens, no claims, no transfers of ownership or interest." She looked up at me over her glasses. "Is there something specific you're concerned about? Has anyone requested information about this property recently, or tried to file any paperwork related to it?" She checked her system again. "No recent requests for information. No filings of any kind in the past year. Why? Is someone claiming an interest in your property?" "Something like that." She printed out an official property report showing my sole ownership and the absence of any claims or encumbrances. "This should clear up any confusion," she said, handing me the document. "If someone is making false claims about ownership, you might want to talk to an attorney." "Already on it," I said. From the records office, I drove to Caleb Rhodes's law office. He was waiting for me with a file folder and a cup of coffee that suggested he'd been working for a while. "I've got good news and interesting news," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. "The good news is that your eviction paperwork is ready to file. The interesting news is what I found when I ran a background check on Brooke." He opened the file and pulled out a printout. "Brooke Marie Henderson, now Brooke Henderson Calix. 2 arrests in the past 5 years, both related to fraudulent use of motor vehicles. The first was dismissed on a technicality. The second resulted in a plea bargain and probation. What kind of fraud? Selling cars she didn't own, classic confidence scheme. She'd gain access to someone's vehicle, create fake paperwork showing ownership, then sell it to unsuspecting buyers. The victims would discover the fraud when they tried to register the vehicles and found out the titles were fake. I stared at the document. She was stealing and selling cars? More precisely, she was fraudulently claiming ownership of cars that belonged to other people, then profiting from that false claim. Sound familiar? The parallel was unmistakable. So this isn't her first time trying to claim someone else's property. Exactly. And here's the really interesting part. In both cases, she gained access to the vehicles through personal relationships. The first was her ex-boyfriend's car. The second belonged to a roommate. People who trusted her. People who trusted her and didn't think she'd cross certain lines. Until she did. Caleb leaned back in his chair. This changes our strategy significantly. We're not just dealing with a family dispute over living arrangements. We're dealing with someone who has a documented pattern of fraudulent property claims. That makes this a much stronger case, and it gives us additional legal options, such as criminal charges, for starters. Unlawful exclusion of a property owner can be prosecuted as criminal trespass. Given her history, the DA might be very interested in this case. I thought about Ethan, caught in the middle of this. What about my brother? Would he face charges too? Depends on his level of involvement. If he was just going along with his wife's plan, he might avoid criminal liability, but he'd still be subject to the eviction proceedings. Caleb pulled out another document. I've prepared two options. Option 1 is a standard eviction notice giving them 30 days to vacate. Option 2 is an emergency motion for immediate restoration of access, based on the illegal lockout and Brooke's criminal history. The emergency motion could have them out in 72 hours. What do you recommend? Professionally? The emergency motion. It's faster, it establishes the seriousness of their actions, and it prevents them from doing further damage to your property or finances. And personally? That depends on how much you want to preserve your relationship with your brother. The emergency motion will feel like a nuclear option to him. The 30-day notice gives him time to process what's happening and make better choices. I looked at both documents, thinking about Ethan sitting on the couch with his head in his hands while his wife stood at the window, chin raised, daring me to do something about it. Let's file the emergency motion, I said. But I want to talk to Ethan first, give him a chance to understand what's happening and decide which side he wants to be on. That's risky. If you tip them off, they might try to damage the property or hide assets. Ethan won't do that, and if Brooke tries, it'll just strengthen our case. Caleb nodded. Okay, but we file the paperwork today, whether you talk to him or not. I don't want to lose time if this goes sideways. Agreed. He handed me copies of all the documents. One more thing, I'd recommend changing your bank accounts and credit cards immediately. If Brooke has access to your mail or personal information, she might try to cause financial damage. She doesn't have access to my accounts. Are you sure? Has she ever had access to your wallet, your mail, your computer? People with her background are very good at obtaining information without the victim realizing it. I thought about the months she'd been living in my house, the times I'd left my wallet on the kitchen counter, the mail that sat on the hall table until I got around to sorting it, the home office she'd taken over, where I used to pay bills online. I'll change everything today, I said. Good. And Dean, be careful. People like Brooke don't give up easily and they don't like being cornered. When she realizes you're fighting back, she's going to escalate. I left Caleb's office with a clear understanding of the legal landscape and a growing sense of unease about what Brooke might do when she realized I wasn't going to roll over and accept her takeover of my house. But I also felt something I hadn't felt since standing on my porch the night before. Control. I had options, resources, and legal standing. More importantly, I had a plan. The first step was to let Ethan know what was coming and give him a chance to choose his own path forward. The second step was to make sure Brooke understood that her pattern of fraudulent property claims was about to come to an abrupt end. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I called my supervisor and explained that I had a family emergency that required immediate attention. Then I spent the morning methodically documenting everything I could remember about the past 8 months. I started with photographs. Using my phone, I documented the new locks on both the front and back doors, the LED light bulb that had replaced my incandescent one, and the changes Brooke had made to the interior that I could see through the windows. I took pictures of my car in the driveway, time-stamped and geotagged, showing that I was present at my own property, but unable to enter. Then I drove to the bank. I need to change all my account numbers and access codes, I told the branch manager. I have reason to believe someone may have compromised my financial information. She was professional and efficient, setting up new checking and savings accounts and arranging to transfer all automatic payments and direct deposits. We'll close the old accounts after a 2-week transition period, she explained. That gives you time to notify anyone who needs the new account information. What about credit monitoring? I'd recommend it given your concerns. We can set that up today. While we were processing the paperwork, I asked about safe deposit boxes. I need to store some important documents where only I can access them. Of course. We have boxes available immediately. I spent another hour at the bank, securing my financial life against someone who had already demonstrated a willingness to commit fraud for personal gain. From the bank, I drove to a different hotel, paying cash for 3 nights and registering under my name, but with my new phone number. I didn't think Brooke would try to track me down, but I saw no reason to make it easy if she did. Then I sat in the hotel room and called Ethan. He answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting for my call. Dean, thank God. Look, about last night. We need to talk, I said. Just you and me. Can you meet me somewhere? Brooke thinks we should all sit down together and work this out. I'm sure she does, but I want to talk to my brother first before we involve anyone else. A long pause. She's not going to like that. Ethan, do you remember when Dad passed and you were trying to decide whether to leave college? Of course. Do you remember what I told you? Another pause. You said I needed to figure out what I wanted, not what everyone else wanted for me. That's right. And what did you decide? I decided to finish school. Even though Mom thought you should come home and help with the family business, even though your girlfriend thought you should transfer to a school closer to her, you made your own decision based on what you thought was right. Yeah. This is the same situation, Ethan. You need to figure out what you want, not what Brooke wants for you. And you need to understand what's really happening here. What do you mean? Meet me at Murphy's Diner on Route 9, 1 hour. Come alone, and I'll explain everything. Dean, I can't just... Yes, you can. You're a grown man, and you're my brother. 1 hour. I hung up before he could argue further. Murphy's Diner was busier during the lunch hour, which was good. I wanted witnesses to our conversation, and I wanted Ethan to feel safe meeting me in a public place. I arrived early and chose a booth near the back where we could talk privately, but not secretly. Ethan showed up 10 minutes late, looking like he hadn't slept. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately started talking. Look, Dean, I know this looks bad, but Brooke just wants us to be treated like family. She feels like we're guests in our own home. It's not your home, Ethan, it's my home. You've been staying there as my guests. But we've been living there for 8 months. We've been contributing to expenses, helping with maintenance. What maintenance have you helped with? He looked uncomfortable. Well, Brooke organized the craft room and she's been managing the household schedule. Ethan. I kept my voice gentle but firm. The craft room used to be my office, and managing the household schedule isn't maintenance. What repairs have you done? What improvements have you paid for? What bills have you covered? We pay for groceries sometimes. Sometimes. With money Brooke makes from selling crafts online, while I pay the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, utilities, and everything else. The waitress came by, and we ordered coffee. After she left, I pulled out the folder Caleb had prepared for me. "I need to show you something," I said, sliding Brooke's criminal background report across the table. Ethan read it in silence, his face growing pale. "This is why she changed the locks, Ethan. This is her pattern. She gains access to someone's property through a personal relationship, then tries to claim ownership of it. But that's different. Those were cars, and she was selling them. She's not trying to sell the house. She's trying to take it. Same principle, different execution." I showed him the property records documenting my sole ownership. There's no legal basis for her claim. None. And by changing the locks, she's committed unlawful exclusion of the property owner. That's a criminal offense. Ethan stared at the documents. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your wife has a history of fraudulent property claims, and she's doing it again. This time with my house, and this time with you as an unwitting accomplice. I'm not an accomplice. I just want us all to get along. Then help me understand something. When did you decide you wanted to stay in the house permanently?" We talked about it, and it seemed like a good arrangement for everyone." "When did we talk about it? Because I remember you asking about adding your name to the deed, and I remember saying I needed to think about it. I don't remember us reaching any agreement." Ethan looked miserable. "Brooke said you were just being cautious, but that you'd come around once you saw how well the arrangement was working. And when I didn't come around, she decided to force the issue by changing the locks. She said it was for security." "Ethan, look at me." I waited until he met my eyes. "Do you really believe that? Do you really think your wife spent money we don't have to upgrade the security on a house where nothing has ever been stolen, in a neighborhood where nothing ever happens? Or do you think she was trying to keep me out of my own house?" He didn't answer, but his expression told me he knew the truth. I slid the eviction papers across the table. "I've filed for emergency restoration of access and immediate eviction. You have 72 hours to vacate the property." "Dean, no, please. We don't have anywhere to go. You should have thought of that before your wife decided to steal my house. She wasn't trying to steal it. She just wanted us to be equal partners." "Equal partners in what? I bought the house. I pay for the house. I maintain the house. What exactly would make you an equal partner?" Ethan had no answer for that. I pulled out one more document, information about a support group for people dealing with family addiction and codependency issues. "I think Brooke has a problem, Ethan, and I think you've been enabling it because you love her and you want to keep the peace. But this isn't about keeping the peace anymore. This is about her committing crimes and dragging you down with her. She's not an addict. Fraud is addictive. Control is addictive. Taking things that don't belong to you is addictive. Look at her history." I stood up and put money on the table for the coffee. "You have 72 hours. You can spend that time helping Brooke fight a legal battle she can't win, or you can spend it figuring out how to build a life that doesn't depend on taking things from other people. What if we just go back to the original arrangement? We'll stay as guests, and Brooke will change the locks back." "It's too late for that. She crossed a line and there's no going back. But Ethan," I put my hand on his shoulder, "you're my brother, and I love you. When you're ready to get help dealing with this situation, call me. I'll be there." I left him sitting in the booth, staring at the papers I'd given him. That evening I drove past the house. Ethan's car was gone, but Brooke's was in the driveway. The lights were on, and I could see her moving around inside, probably trying to figure out how to respond to the legal papers that had been served that afternoon. I didn't stop. I just drove by, checking on my property, and then returned to the hotel. My phone rang at 11 p.m. "Brooke." "You absolute piece of work," she said without preamble. "You're really going to put your own brother out on the street?" "I'm removing 2 people who pushed me out of my own property without any right to do so. Where's Ethan?" "He's at his friend Mike's place, breaking down because his older brother decided to turn on him." "Good. Maybe Mike can help him understand what's actually happening here." "What's happening here is that you're being incredibly self-centered and can't stand the idea of sharing anything with family." What's happening here is that you committed a crime, and now you're facing the consequences, just like with the cars. Silence. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Fraudulent property claims are your specialty. The only difference is that this time you picked the wrong victim. You can't prove anything. I don't have to prove anything. I just have to prove that I own the house and you don't, which I already did. She hung up. I turned off my phone and went to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring the resolution I'd been working toward. I woke up at 5 a.m. on Thursday morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Today was the day the 72-hour eviction notice expired. Today was the day I got my house back. I'd spent the previous day making final preparations. I'd met with Caleb to review the court order and coordinate with the sheriff's department. I'd arranged for a locksmith to be on standby to change the locks again, this time legally, with proper documentation and law enforcement present. I'd even contacted a moving company that specialized in emergency relocations, in case Ethan and Brooke needed help getting their belongings out quickly. The court order was comprehensive and unambiguous. Brooke and Ethan had to vacate the property immediately. Any attempt to interfere with my access to the house would result in arrest for contempt of court. Any damage to the property would result in additional criminal charges and financial liability. But more importantly, Caleb's research had uncovered something that changed everything. I found the connection, he'd told me Wednesday afternoon, calling with barely contained excitement. Remember how Brooke's previous fraud charges involved vehicles she'd gained access to through personal relationships? Right, her ex-boyfriend and a roommate. Well, I tracked down the roommate, woman named Brielle Varro. Yes, relation to your neighbor Mrs. Varro, it turns out. Brielle was happy to talk once she understood why I was calling. What did she say? Brooke's pattern is very specific. She moves in with someone under the pretense of temporary help or mutual benefit. Then, she gradually starts asserting ownership rights over their property. She creates fake documentation, tells elaborate stories about verbal agreements, and uses emotional manipulation to make the victim feel guilty for enforcing their legal rights. That sounds exactly like what she's been doing with the house. It gets better. Brielle still has copies of fake documents Brooke created, trying to prove she owned Brielle's car. Bills of sale, registration transfers, even a fake notarized title. All forgeries, but sophisticated ones. So this isn't just a pattern. It's a refined system. Exactly. And here's the kicker. Brielle thinks Brooke might have tried the same thing with other people. She mentioned that Brooke talked about previous business partnerships that had gone bad because her partners were too selfish to honor their agreements. Other victims? Almost certainly. I've reached out to the DA's office. They're very interested in this case, especially given the pattern of escalation from vehicle fraud to real estate fraud. What does that mean for tomorrow? It means when the sheriff serves the eviction notice, there's a good chance Brooke will be arrested on additional fraud charges. It also means you're not just getting your house back. You're helping to stop someone who's been doing this to multiple victims. That conversation had given me a sense of purpose beyond just resolving my own situation. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about stopping a predator who used personal relationships to commit property fraud. Now, sitting in the hotel room at 5 a.m., I felt ready for whatever the day would bring. I showered, dressed in my best suit, and drove to Caleb's office. The sheriff's deputy was already there, a professional-looking woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Deputy Martinez. "I've reviewed the case file," she said, shaking my hand. "This is pretty straightforward from a law enforcement perspective. We serve the eviction notice, ensure compliance, and arrest anyone who interferes with the process. What if they're not there? Then we change the locks and secure the property. They'll have 24 hours to contact us and arrange to retrieve their belongings under supervision. And if they are there? Depends on their response. If they comply peacefully, we help them gather their things and leave. If they resist or cause problems..." She shrugged. "That's what handcuffs are for." Caleb handed me a new set of keys. "The locksmith is standing by. As soon as the property is secured, He'll install new locks and give you the only copies. What about Ethan? Has he tried to contact you? No, but I did get a call from someone named Mike Henderson, asking about options for people facing eviction. I gave him the number for legal aid and some information about tenant assistance programs. Mike's a good guy. If Ethan's staying with him, at least he's somewhere safe. What about Brooke? Any word from her? Nothing since Tuesday night, but her car's been at the house every time I've driven by. Deputy Martinez checked her watch. Okay, gentlemen, it's 8 a.m. and the eviction notice expires in 1 hour. Let's go reclaim your house. We drove to my street in a small convoy. My car, Caleb's car, the deputy's patrol car, and the locksmith's van. I felt like a general leading an army into battle, except the battle was for something that had always been mine to begin with. Mrs. Vero was in her front yard, ostensibly tending to her garden, but clearly positioned to observe whatever was about to happen. Hannah Porter was visible through her kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, watching the proceedings with obvious interest. We parked in front of the house. Brooke's car was in the driveway, but I didn't see any movement inside. Deputy Martinez took the lead, walking up to the front door with the eviction notice in hand. Caleb and I followed at a respectful distance. She knocked firmly. Sheriff's Department. I have legal papers to serve. No response. She knocked again, louder. This is Deputy Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department. I need to speak with the occupants of this residence immediately. Still no response, but I saw a curtain twitch in the upstairs bedroom window. Ma'am, I know you're in there. Please come to the door so we can handle this professionally. Finally, the door opened. Brooke stood there in a bathrobe, her hair disheveled, looking like she hadn't slept. What do you want? I'm here to serve an eviction notice and ensure compliance with a court order. You have been ordered to vacate this property immediately. Brooke looked past the deputy to where I was standing. This is harassment. That's my house too. Ma'am, according to the court order, you have no legal claim to this property. You need to gather your belongings and leave now. I'm not going anywhere. Dean can call the police if he wants, but I know my rights. Deputy Martinez's expression didn't change, but her voice became more formal. Ma'am, I am the police, and you're currently in violation of a court order. You can comply voluntarily, or I can place you under arrest for contempt of court. Your choice. For a moment, I thought Brooke might actually try to slam the door and barricade herself inside. But then she seemed to realize that she was facing a law enforcement officer, not just me and my attorney. Fine, but I need time to pack. You have 2 hours to gather your personal belongings. Nothing else leaves this house without the owner's permission. Brooke looked at me again. What about Ethan's stuff? He can arrange to pick it up later, I said, under supervision. You're really going to do this to your own brother? I'm really going to enforce my legal rights to my own property? She went back inside, leaving the door open. We could hear her moving around upstairs, opening and closing drawers, talking to someone on the phone. Deputy Martinez turned to me. She's going to test every boundary. Don't let her manipulate you into making exceptions or giving her more time. I won't. And if she tries to take anything that doesn't clearly belong to her, speak up immediately. People in her situation often try to steal valuable items on their way out, figuring the owner won't make a fuss to avoid prolonging the confrontation. An hour later, Brooke came downstairs with 2 suitcases and a box of what looked like craft supplies. She was fully dressed now, and her demeanor had shifted from defiant to coldly angry. I'll be back for the rest of my things, she announced. You'll need to coordinate that through the court, Deputy Martinez replied. You no longer have access to this property. What about my furniture, my kitchen stuff? I spoke up. What furniture? What kitchen stuff? Everything in this house was here before you moved in. The coffee maker, the shower curtain, the craft room furniture. The coffee maker was mine. The shower curtain you can take. The craft room furniture was my office furniture that you rearranged. Her face flushed with anger. You're being petty. I'm being accurate. She loaded her belongings into her car, making a show of struggling with the heavy suitcases. When neither I nor the deputy offered to help, she gave up the performance and handled them easily. Before getting in her car, she turned to me one last time. "This isn't over, Dean. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started." "I know exactly what I've started," I replied. "I've started enforcing the law." She drove away, tires squealing slightly as she left the neighborhood. Deputy Martinez watched her go, then turned to the locksmith. "All right, let's get those locks changed." 20 minutes later, I was holding the keys to my own house for the first time in 3 days. "Congratulations," Caleb said, shaking my hand. "How does it feel?" I looked at my house. Really looked at it. The porch light was back to incandescent. The front door was mine to open. The rooms inside were arranged the way I wanted them. "It feels like coming home," I said. But even as I said it, I knew Brooke had been right about one thing. This wasn't over. People like her don't give up easily, and they don't forget perceived slights. I was going to have to stay vigilant. I spent Thursday night in my own house for the first time in 3 days, sleeping in my own bed, in my own room, surrounded by the silence that comes from being truly alone in a space that belongs to you. I woke up Friday morning to the sound of someone pounding on my front door. It was 6 a.m. Through the bedroom window, I could see a police car in my driveway, but this wasn't Deputy Martinez. This was a male officer I didn't recognize, and he looked serious. I threw on clothes and hurried downstairs. "Mr. Calix, I'm Officer Thompson with the county police. I need to speak with you about Brooke Henderson Calix." "What about her?" "She was arrested last night on charges of vehicle fraud and identity theft. During processing, she made some serious accusations against you. I need to ask you some questions." My stomach dropped. "What kind of accusations?" "She claims you've been financially mistreating her and your brother, that you forced them out of their home unlawfully, and that you intimidated her with threats of harm." I stared at him. "None of that is true." "I figured as much, based on what I found when I reviewed the case file, but I need to get your statement on record, and I need to verify some details." Officer Thompson came inside and spent an hour going through the timeline of events. I showed him the court orders, the property records, Brooke's prior record, and the documentation of the lawful eviction process. "She's claiming the house belongs to her and your brother jointly," he said, reviewing my paperwork. "She's lying. Here's the deed, the mortgage records, and the property tax bills. Everything is in my name alone." "And what about this claim that you threatened her with harm?" "I never threatened her with anything. The only time I spoke to her directly after the lockout was one phone call, and I have the phone records to prove it." Officer Thompson made notes in his report. "Here's what happened. After she left your house yesterday, she went to a bar and started telling people that her brother-in-law had stolen her house and threatened to hurt her if she didn't leave. Someone at the bar knew she had outstanding warrants for vehicle fraud, so they called it in." "Outstanding warrants?" "Yeah, turns out she violated her probation from the previous fraud case. When we picked her up, she started making wild accusations about you, probably hoping to create a distraction from her own legal problems." "Is she still in custody?" "She'll be in custody for a while. The DA's office is treating this as a pattern of escalating fraud. They're looking at charging her with attempted real estate fraud in addition to the vehicle stuff." After Officer Thompson left, I called Caleb to update him on the situation. "This is actually good news," he said. "False accusations against you just add to her credibility problem. And if she's in custody, she can't cause you any more immediate trouble." "What about Ethan? Have you heard from him?" "Actually, yes. He called this morning. He wants to meet with you." "About what?" "He didn't say, but he sounded different, calmer, like maybe he's starting to understand what really happened." We arranged to meet at Murphy's Diner again, same booth, same time. But this time, when Ethan walked in, he looked like a different person. He was clean-shaven, wearing clothes that fit properly, and his eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been in months. "Dean," he said, sitting down across from me, I owe you an apology. Okay? I've been staying with Mike since Wednesday, and he's been helping me understand some things. About Brooke, about our situation, about what I've been doing to myself and to you. The waitress brought us coffee without being asked. After she left, Ethan continued. Mike showed me some articles about financial abuse and manipulation. I didn't realize it at the time, but Brooke's been controlling every aspect of my life for the past 2 years. Where I worked, how I spent my time, who I talked to, what decisions I made. She convinced me that this was normal, that this was what marriage looked like. I was worried about that. I know you were. I can see it now, looking back at things you said, ways you tried to help. But I was so deep in it that I couldn't see what was happening. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Mike helped me make a list of all the things Brooke convinced me to do that I knew were wrong. It's a long list. You don't have to show me that. I want to, because I want you to understand that I know what I did and I know why it was wrong. He unfolded the paper and read from it. Asking you to put my name on the deed, letting her take over your office, not looking for work because she said I didn't need to, not standing up for you when she started talking about the house like it was ours, and the big one, not stopping her from changing the locks. Did you know she was going to do that? I knew she was thinking about it. She said it was for security, but I knew that wasn't true. I knew it was about control. And I let her do it anyway, because I was afraid of what would happen if I stood up to her. What would have happened? She would have left me. And I was so afraid of being alone that I was willing to let her destroy my relationship with you to avoid it. Ethan folded the paper and put it away. Mike's been taking me to meetings, support groups for people who've been in controlling relationships. I'm starting to understand that what I thought was love was actually fear. How are you feeling about all of this? Scared, ashamed, but also relieved? Like I can finally breathe again. What do you want to do now? I want to get my life back. Mike's helping me look for work, and there's a program through the support group that helps people find housing and rebuild their independence. I'm not asking you to take care of me anymore. And Brooke? I'm done with Brooke. I've filed for divorce. She can deal with her legal problems on her own. We sat in silence for a moment, drinking our coffee. Ethan, I want you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. This was about protecting my property and my rights, not about punishing you. I know that now, and I want you to know that I'm going to pay you back for everything. The groceries, the utilities, the damage Brooke caused. It might take a while, but I'll pay it all back. We can worry about that later. Right now, I just want you to focus on getting healthy and building a life that makes you happy. There's one more thing, Ethan said. I know where Brooke hid some of your stuff. Documents, mail, things she took from your office. She was planning to use them to try to prove she had a claim to the house. Where? Storage unit on the other side of town. I have the key. That afternoon, Ethan and I went to the storage unit together. Inside, we found boxes of my personal papers, including financial documents, insurance policies, and correspondence that Brooke had systematically stolen over the course of several months. She was building a case, Ethan explained. She had this whole plan to claim that we were common law married and that she was entitled to half of everything you owned. Common law married? To me? No, to me. But she figured if she could establish that we were married and that I had a claim to the house, she could control that claim. That's insane. That's Brooke. We loaded the boxes into my car and drove back to the house. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Mrs. Vero working in her garden again. She waved at us, and for the first time in months, it felt like a normal neighborhood interaction. Dean, Ethan said as we unloaded the boxes. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think we can be brothers again, eventually? I looked at him, really looked at him. He was thinner than he'd been 8 months ago, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But he also looked more like himself than he had in years. "We never stopped being brothers," I said. "We just lost our way for a while. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be someone you can be proud of. I'm already proud of you. It takes courage to admit you've made mistakes and ask for help." We spent the rest of the afternoon going through the recovered documents and putting my office back together. Ethan helped me move the furniture back to its original arrangement and organize the papers that Brooke had scattered and hidden. As the sun was setting, we ordered pizza and sat in the living room, eating and talking about neutral topics like work and sports and movies we'd seen recently. It felt like the first normal conversation we'd had in months. "I should go," Ethan said eventually. "Mike's expecting me back, and I have a job interview tomorrow." "Good luck with the interview." "Thanks. And Dean, thank you for not giving up on me." After he left, I walked through the house, room by room, taking inventory of what was mine again. The kitchen, where I could make coffee the way I liked it without someone rearranging my equipment. The living room, where I could watch what I wanted without negotiating. The office, where I could work on my own projects without someone else's craft supplies taking up space. But most importantly, the front door, where my key worked in my lock and no one could keep me out of the place I called home. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the front porch, looking out at the quiet street. Hannah Porter was walking her dog, and she waved as she passed. Mrs. Vero was bringing in her garden tools for the evening. A couple of kids were riding bicycles in the fading light. It was a normal Friday evening in a normal neighborhood, and I was exactly where I belonged. My phone rang. "Caleb." "I wanted to give you the final update," he said. "Brooke pled guilty to multiple fraud charges this afternoon. She'll be in prison for at least 18 months, possibly longer depending on what other victims come forward." "Other victims?" "The DA's office has been getting calls all day from people who think they might have been scammed by her. Turns out your case opened up a much bigger investigation. I'm glad she's been stopped." "Me too. And Dean, you handled this exactly right. You used the system the way it's supposed to work, and you got the result you deserved." After we hung up, I sat on the porch until it was fully dark, thinking about the past week and how quickly things could change when you finally decided to stand up for yourself. I thought about Brooke, sitting in a jail cell, probably still convinced that she was the victim in all of this. I thought about Ethan, staying with a friend and learning how to make his own decisions again. And I thought about myself, sitting on my own porch, holding the keys to my own house, finally understanding the difference between keeping the peace and letting someone steal your life. The locks were changed, but more importantly, so was I. I wasn't the same person who had stood on this porch 3 days ago, confused and humiliated by someone else's audacity. I was someone who understood his own worth, knew his rights, and was willing to enforce both. I finished my coffee, went inside, and locked the door behind me. It was good to be home.